Hello and welcome. My name is Annie Rogers, and on behalf of the Attitude team, I'm so pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD experts presentation titled Perfectionism and ADHD, Making Good Enough Work for You. Perfectionism is an unhealthy insistence on personal flawlessness. It's a trait that's linked to increased anxiety and shame, as well as low self-esteem. In teens and adults with ADHD, perfectionism often shows up in the form of procrastination. If perfect is your goal, how do you even begin? In this webinar, we'll explore the roots of perfectionism, understand its relationship to ADHD and anxiety, and learn how to shift to a healthier mindset. Leading today's presentation is Dr. Sharon Saline. Sharon is a clinical psychologist and author of the award-winning book, What Your ADHD Child Wishes You Knew, working together to empower kids for success in school and life, as well as the ADHD Solution Deck. She specializes in working with children, teens, emerging adults, and families living with ADHD, anxiety, learning disabilities, high-functioning autism, twice exceptionality, and mental health issues. Her unique perspective as a sibling in an ADHD home, combined with decades of experience as a clinical psychologist and educator consultant, assists her in guiding families and adults toward effective communication and closer connections. She lectures and facilitates workshops internationally on topics such as understanding ADHD, executive functioning, anxiety, motivation, different kinds of learners, and the teen brain. Captivating. Dr. Saline is a regular contributor to AttitudeMag.com and PsychologyToday.com, featured expert on Mass Appeal and WWLP TV, and a part-time lecturer at the Smith School for Social Work. Her writing has been featured in numerous online and print publications, such as MSN, the Psychotherapy Networker, Smith College Studies and Social Work, Attention Magazine, of course, Attitude Magazine, Psych Central, and Inquirer.com. We encourage you to visit www.drsharonsaline, that's DRSharonSaline.com. And I will also mention that we are so fortunate that Sharon joins us for a weekly Facebook live session every single Friday on a different topic, answering your questions. So please join us any Friday. That's at 4 p.m. Eastern, and you can find the link right on the Attitude Facebook page. Before I hand over the microphone to Dr. Saline, I have just a few housekeeping items. If you are tuned into the live webinar, you may download the slides now by clicking on the Event Resources section of your webinar screen. And if you're interested in the Certificate of Attendance option, look for instructions in an email that you will receive about an hour after we wrap up the live broadcast. If you are listening in replay or podcast mode, visit AttitudeMag.com and search for podcast 385 to access the slides, webinar replay, certificate of attendance option, and more. Finally, if you support the work we're doing at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine for your family or to share with a teacher or loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. And finally, the sponsor for this week's webinar is Play Attention, Enhance Brain Health and Performance. For more than 25 years, Play Attention has been helping children and adults thrive and succeed at school, home, and work. Their NASA-inspired technology and cognitive training courses improve executive function and self-regulation. Each program includes a lifetime membership and a personal executive function coach to customize your program along the way. Click on the link on your screen to schedule your free one-to-one consultation to discuss a customized executive function training course for you. You can also call 800-788-6786 or visit www.playattention.com. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinar series. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. With all of that said, I am so pleased to welcome Dr. Saline. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this really compelling discussion on perfectionism.
Thank you so much, Annie, for that beautiful introduction. I'm so excited to be here. And I know that this is going to be a very engaging conversation, and hopefully you'll learn something. As I was preparing this presentation, I struggled because I'm a recovering perfectionist, and I use recovering in quotes. So I found myself asking questions like, how can I share all the important stuff about perfectionism succinctly and effectively in 1 hour? What if I get a statistic wrong? What if people don't like the presentation? Is this presentation good enough to be considered finished? How will I know if I did a good job? And what is a good job anyway? Of course, that led me to this next question, which is, what is perfectionism? So defined from the American Psychological Association dictionary, perfectionism is the tendency to demand of others or of oneself in an extremely high or even flawless level of performance in excess of what is required by a situation. So that's a lot of psychological wordiness, but there's a difference between having a desire to excel, so that's kind of ambition, motivation, and a desire to be perfect, which actually can thwart the desire to excel. So a meta-analysis from 1989 to 2016 showed that perfectionism has increased in the general population, even when we control for gender and cultural differences. And this was through Curran and Hill, who are perfectionism researchers. Now, perfectionism is related to a fixed mindset. It's very outcome-oriented, and there's a belief that your personal traits can't change or improve over time. There are two sides of perfectionism. There's an adaptive side or a productive side, and that's the motivation to get started, to persist on tasks and projects, a desire to do a good job, to create a piece of work or express yourself when you have pride and satisfaction in what you're doing. Perfectionism also contributes to the productive side of worry. It helps people by encouraging planning and initiation, such as getting to work on time or remembering to charge your phone. But there's also what's called a maladaptive and what I've named toxic side of perfectionism. And this is limiting and harmful because it involves self-criticism and negative self-talk. Kind of rigidity, not completely right means failure. A fear of disappointment, of disappointing yourself or others. Avoidance of failure, not trying because you believe that your effort isn't going to earn the desired result. A sensitivity to feedback, which can be a defensiveness, but it could also be a sensitivity to rejection or in general, just, negative, what you perceive as negative feedback. And discouragement or depression, having a low self-worth or low self-esteem due to these incomplete and imperfect goals that you aren't able to reach. Now, there are 3 types of perfectionism, according to Flett, Green, and Hewitt. These are some of the leading researchers on perfectionism. There's perfectionism that is toward the self. It's self-directed. And this is where you hold yourself and you attach a kind of irrational importance to being perfect. You hold unrealistic expectations of yourself, and you might kind of be punitive in your self-evaluation, meaning meaning you put yourself down, you're negative and sometimes really mean to yourself. There's often a harsh inner voice that can be a form in extreme, according to the researchers, of self-abuse. These researchers, particularly Paul Hewitt, have found that this kind of perfectionism, self-directed perfectionism, can establish and reveal a vulnerability to depression, anorexia, and even suicide. The second type of perfectionism is socially prescribed or socially oriented perfectionism. And this is deeply and directly connected to social anxiety. You're perceiving something from other people. You're believing that your social context is overly demanding, that other people are judging you harshly, and you have to be perfect in order to obtain approval or acceptance. So there's this combination of pressure and helplessness and hopelessness. There's a belief, the better I do, the better people expect me to believe, that can also be part of this socially prescribed perfectionism. Now, the third type of perfectionism is other-oriented perfectionism. And this is when someone directs often the same rigid and, unrealistic standards that they hold for themselves towards other people. And many people impose unrealistic standards on the people around them and evaluate others critically and often without forgiveness or empathy. This can be dangerous for intimate relationships, partnerships, as well as for friendships, work collegiality, parenting, and family dynamics. Underneath the mask of perfectionism, regardless of the type, is an effort and an attempt to conceal problems, to conceal what you perceive of as deficiencies. So we're going to do a little survey right now, a poll, to make this as interactive as possible. I'd like to know, what do you think your prominent trait of perfectionism is? Is it all or nothing thinking? Is it setting unreasonable standards? Negative comparisons with others? Not feeling fundamentally good enough? Living by shoulds? Loretta LaRoche famously said, "We should all over ourselves," or being sensitive to feedback. So we're going to launch this poll. Let's just hold on for a second, because technology sometimes takes a minute. And I will talk a little bit about how ADHD, particularly adult ADHD, and perfectionism and anxiety work together while I'm waiting for this poll. So I'm going to just check in and see that the poll is happening. Let's see. I'm just going to send an email about that, a little message, just to make sure it goes. Okay, I'm going to check the surveys tab. Here we go. It's up to me. All right. Oh, the poll is launched. Okay, I'm having a little perfectionism anxiety because I missed that. Oh, wow. Okay, so I see some of the results now. You guys are really doing a great job. Thank you so much for participating. I am going to send the results to you, and I'm going to share them. And the number one trait of perfectionism by this particular group today is not feeling good enough. And I really understand that, particularly when we get into how it relates to ADHD. The number two issue was setting unreasonable standards. So thank you so much for participating, and you can look at the other ones at your leisure. All right, so let's go to our next slide, and let's talk just in general, because if we're talking about perfectionism, it's related to anxiety. Now, anxiety and anxiety disorders, which I'm using just for the clinical term, and having an anxiety diagnosis, does not mean that you are going to be, that perfectionism is one of those things. Perfectionism is a trait where anxiety is more of a state characteristic. So anxiety disorders are problems related to fears and worries. Anxiety disorders differ based on the focus of a person's worry, i.e., trying to get everything right and be perfect. And anxiety wants safety and security. It doesn't like uncomfortable feelings or uncertainty. It tries to make them go away immediately. Anxious adults often have lower self-confidence, as well as sometimes professional and peer difficulties or family conflict. We want to remember that anxiety is a natural human response that's evolved over the centuries and comes from serving a purpose. And so our goal can never be to dismiss it entirely, because that's not realistic. But instead, we want to respond to it in ways that are healthier and more manageable, and learn to turn down the volume on that intensity, on the anxiety's intensity and its noise. There's a genetic component to anxiety, which is more like a predisposition to it. Children of anxious parents have been found to be more likely to be anxious. About 1/5 to 1/2 of adults with ADHD, in addition to the 50%, so there's 50% who have ADHD who have an anxiety diagnosis, about 1/3 to 1/2 have a major depressive diagnosis, or what's called dysthymia. The link between ADHD and substance abuse is well documented, and studies suggest that 25 to 40% of adults with a substance abuse disorder also have ADHD and may be engaging in that substance abuse disorder or that substance use to relieve some of the anxiety or the depression. So how does this relate to perfectionism? Okay, so perfectionism is a risk factor, particularly in high stress situations, for hopelessness and panic, for an eating disorder, and sometimes in extreme cases for suicide. We know that anxiety is a state of being worried and tense in the face of a threat to safety. So normal anxiety can increase awareness for any possible threats, and significant stress can impede our ability to perform daily functions and foster chronic anxiety. Perfectionistic anxiety often reflects performance anxiety. I know that for me, I can be much more anxious when I have something that I have to do, like present on perfectionism or something else. Now, it's interesting because anxiety sensitivity, which is a fear of your own anxiety, and it's when you avoid certain behaviors or situations that cause anxiety. Research has shown that perfectionism is linked to anxiety sensitivity. Perfectionism can fuel anxiety by creating high standards that the anxiety may, because it's trying to prevent you from stress or worry or what's perceived as something uncertain, will actually prevent you from achieving. So you create these high standards with perfectionism, and then that fuels anxiety because you can't achieve those high standards because the anxiety is getting in your way. It's kind of a vicious cycle. Perfectionism acts as an inefficient coping mechanism for many, many people for managing anxiety related to a believed or a foreseen disappointment, yours or someone else's, insecurity, or potential embarrassment. All or nothing thinking increases concerns about negative responses, outcomes, and potential punishment, which also intensifies the perfectionism and the anxiety. So what about ADHD in this picture? So perfectionism actually shares a lot of traits with ADHD. Perfectionists are often driven by a fear of disappointing themselves or others. They can be all or nothing thinkers, If it's not completely right, it must be a failure. This is true for people who live with ADHD as well. Is this true for you? Setting unreasonable standards and constantly comparing yourself to others is common for perfectionists, just as it's common for individuals with ADHD, who often compare themselves critically to neurotypical peers. Both perfectionists and people with ADHD are sensitive to criticism, sometimes to the level of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, and can be easily discouraged when they can't meet a goal. Perfectionism is one way that teens, older teens, and adults with ADHD try to control an outcome, a fundamental aspect of managing anxiety. This is what anxiety is trying to do: control an outcome or prevent what's perceived to be as a potential unpleasant or embarrassing outcome. Living with ADHD frequently means experiencing moments when you're aware that you're struggling, or you've messed up, or you've missed the mark in some way, but you don't know necessarily why or how to fix it. And this develops into a persistent worry that leads to a chronic low level of anxiety, which occurs in your day to day. You're asking yourself, when is the next time I'm going to receive negative feedback when I wasn't expecting it? When is the next time I'm going to mess up and I didn't even know I was doing something that wasn't okay? A lot of people with ADHD and a lot of perfectionists blame themselves for things that aren't their responsibility or their fault, and then they shame themselves for making mistakes. So it's that kind of the shoulding that really hurts us. Depending on other people for validation and approval is something both perfectionists and many people with ADHD do, particularly those who struggle with social anxiety. And procrastination. Procrastination is something that perfectionists do, and people with ADHD who maybe or may not be perfectionists also do. Procrastinate if I can't get it right or I'm worried about failure. So let's talk a little bit about perfectionism, procrastination, and ADHD. So there's a myth that procrastinators are doing nothing. They're just wasting their time. But actually, many procrastinators are pretty busy doing other things except the thing that they don't want to do, or they feel intimidated by, or they just don't enjoy. They're sharpening their pencils. You're picking the right music to listen to when you're working. You're tidying up your workspace instead of actually doing some of the work. It often seems like people with ADHD who procrastinate can be productive as long as they're not focusing on something that doesn't interest them, seems impossible, or takes too much effort. Procrastination is related to perfectionism in its very nature of delaying an activity. The reasons for the delay or how the delay shows up may differ according to each individual. Perfectionism procrastination is when you want things to be a certain way and you give up or you postpone doing them when you don't think they can be. You may be motivated by meeting a deadline and doing a great job, and you're expecting validation. You may create a comforting order to how you do things so you don't have to worry about missing something. The routine becomes important. So perfectionism can be helpful, but it can also really hurt you because you may not be able to get started because you don't think it can be right, or you may not be able to meet this idealized version of how you think it should be. You may feel like it's never finished. I just have to say for myself that in putting together this presentation, I did it, and then I put it down, and then I looked at it the next day, and then I looked at it, and then I put it down, and then I looked at it again. Just kept tweaking things until finally I was like, I have to turn it in. So I'm owning my perfectionist tendencies as part of reducing the shame that we all feel when we do this. And I think that it's important, rather than saying I'm going to get rid of my perfectionism, to take a recovery model. That's what I do, and that's what I'm going to encourage you to do. The second type of avoidance procrastination The second type of procrastination is avoidance procrastination, when things seem too difficult or unpleasant to begin with, and because you can't do them right. So this is also related to perfectionism. There's a lack of confidence in your ability, matched with difficulty gauging how to approach a task or gauge its size. Perhaps there's a memory of a previous failure that haunts beginning this particular effort. You may see the task as Mount Everest. You may not know where to start, or you may not see a finish. You're going to avoid it. And of course, that does reflect some perfectionist tendencies. There's also productive procrastination, which is when we keep ourselves busy with something else and avoid the big task because of underlying doubts or fears. You may do something that needs to be accomplished, but is less urgent or important than the task you're actually avoiding. This will make you feel temporarily better, so you have some short-term relief, but it increases your long-term stress. It's really a delay tactic. For example, I'm going to do the laundry and get that started because I need to do the laundry instead of actually working on my report that my boss wants, or perhaps writing a history paper if you're a student. I'm curious if you can just take a minute and reflect for yourself. What kind of procrastination do you engage in most often? And if you want to share that with when we get to, if there's a way to share that, I don't know. I think not, but I wish there were. Okay. Tools for decreasing procrastination. So the issue is that we are going to procrastinate. We are going to want things to be a certain way, and we have to figure out how we're going to get around the desire to put it off if we can't make it the way we want. So the common tools are: do a brain dump, identify what's critical to do right now, emergencies and crises, the old Eisenhower matrix, break tasks down. With a smaller chunk of work as your goal, you can then set a start and a stop time. Use your tomato timers or some other technological device to help you work in chunks that have boundaries around them, so you can work for a time, take a break for a time. This can help you summon up the motivation you need to begin. You also might want to, and I highly encourage you to do that, to create some phrases to talk back to the procrastinator part of yourself. Say maybe, yes, I can do this, and I have succeeded in the past, or I've set my timers, I've planned my reward, I'm going to take a walk with my friend Jody at 4 p.m. when I stop. So let's get started with something, anything. And that's the key, particularly for people with ADHD. It's getting started with something. Not the whole task. That's why we want to break it down. But you want to get over the hurdle of not doing into doing. So what are some general tools for reducing perfectionism? Oh boy, big task. So we're going to work on our interpersonal needs, which are the precursors of perfectionism. Do you have a need to be accepted? Do you have a need to be cared for? A need to feel like you matter? These are the many facets that lie behind perfectionism. And these are core issues for many people with ADHD. There's also, addressing issues related to imposter syndrome, a fear of failure or shame. I'm not who people think I am. I'm not who I present. People don't know the failure I truly am underneath. If I mess up, I'm a bad person. Because that's what shame is. Shame is, I made a mistake, I'm a bad person. Versus guilt, which is, I made a mistake, I can make a change. I'm not a bad person because of that. And that's a key difference for people who are both perfectionists and people who live with ADHD. So what are you going to say to counteract those statements? These expectations of being judged, humiliated, or rejected, or the aspect of them that are self-loathing, reflect a core belief of deficiency that need a counter statement or several counter statements, and perhaps even Post-its around your house to remind you of what you can say instead of those kinds of comments. We see imposter syndrome a lot with social anxiety because people think that they're who they really are is not going to be accepted, and so they're trying to be something else, and they're afraid that they're going to be discovered. Even if they are being who they think they want to be, there's still a fear that that's not good enough. Now, our ex-president Teddy Roosevelt famously said that comparison is the thief of joy. I love this because what he's talking about, and particularly in today's world, is looking to each side to see what other people are doing over here. What I would like to encourage you to do is to look forwards and backwards. Look at where you've come from and where you're going, not sideways. Okay, we want to move away from focusing on the unreasonable and basically false standards of what it means to be a good mother or a good worker or a good friend that are perpetuated by popular culture and by social media. The reason that we don't want to look sideways is because we don't want to engage in compare and despair. Compare and despair is something that perfectionists often do. They're comparing some idea, am I going to get this the way it needs to be, to some idea that they're not going to be able to do that, and imagining the despair that they're going to feel when that occurs. Or they see how someone else is doing something, you may do this, and they look at themselves and say, well, I can't do that. What's wrong with me? This is very common for people who live with ADHD to always feel like, oh, I'm not quite, on target. And other people may know this about me. I see how they do it. Why can't I do that as well? So your path toward greater contentment lies with not looking sideways and engaging in compare and despair, but as a perfectionist to look forwards and backwards. Where have I come from? Where am I going? When I was 40, I learned how to ski. I live in New England and I didn't know how to ski. And I thought, okay, well, I have kids. I want to learn how to ski. So I took some ski lessons with my friend, Sheldon. He was a ski instructor. And I was not very good at downhill skiing. And it was hard for me. And he took me on this run. This run was called Big Chief, and it was a blue run. And I'd only done green runs. And I fell and like 2 or 3 times before I got even to the middle of the run. And I was cursing him and cursing myself. Why am I doing this? I'm clearly uncoordinated. And he stopped. And he looked at me and he said, Sharon, turn around. I'm like, ugh, I don't want to turn around. I hate this. When do we get to the bottom? He said, turn around. And I turned around and he said, look at where you came from. And when I did that, something shifted for me. I was like, oh my God, I got all the way down here. Even though I fell twice, he said, you got all the way down here. And we're going to get down there. And you're probably going to fall twice too. And that's okay. This is kind of the message that I'm trying to communicate to you. Look at where you've come from, not where other people think you should be, and where you want to go. We want to identify that. That's how we're going to undo some of the perfectionism tendencies. Perhaps you need an accountability buddy or a friend, or you have a therapist or a coach, someone who can be there with you, who can help you shift this perspective. Ask yourself, how have I managed to deal with my perfectionism in the past? Anxiety erases memories of success. Engage a buddy, a friend, a loved one, to help you recall and hold you as you attempt to notice that you're human and accept it, instead of trying to be something that's a standard that you absolutely can't meet. In fact, no one could meet. So this means we're going to change our relationship to worry. Anxiety is manipulative and, as I said, wants comfort and security. It's the reaction to your worries related to perfectionism, not eliminating them, that makes the difference. You can't close the certainty gap. Perfectionism is a signal to you that your coping skills are too overwhelmed to solve a problem or a challenge that's right in front of you. That means we're going to have to slow things down, pay attention to our breathing, and think in a different category. Validate what your experience is instead of denying it. It makes sense that I'm worried and I'm trying to get things just so. I want to impress my boss. I want to throw my son a great birthday party. I want to be a supportive wife while my husband's looking for a job. I'm not sure I can handle it. It's natural to worry in that situation. So it's almost like what Tara Brach suggests. You put your hand on your heart and you express some kindness to yourself. It's natural to worry, to put pressure, to feel stress in these situations. We want to remember that to reduce perfectionism is part of a recovery process. It's not a process of elimination. So what are some tools to overcome perfectionism? So building awareness. Now, mindfulness refers to paying attention to something in the present moment without judgment or shame. Mindfulness doesn't actually mean meditation. It's one form of practicing it, like yoga or Tai Chi. Mindful focus during a situation when you normally feel anxious is the goal here, and choosing to pay attention to something else. I'm going to shift from making sure something needs to be this particular way to focusing on what is something small that I can do that's working toward that direction. Can I ski just once across the mountain and then take a pause? So this means you're going to say something to yourself like, it's okay, I'm efforting, and sometimes that doesn't work out. Or we all make mistakes at some point. It doesn't mean that I'm a bad person. These phrases will help you talk back to the negative voice in your head so you can nurture your positive attributes. Perfectionism says blah, 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 and you can't do that, or you can't do that well enough. It's an overestimation of the task and an underestimation of the personal skills and resources you have to cope with that challenge. Shift from that to wondering about something. You're going to shift from worrying to wondering. I wonder about blah, blah, blah. Assess your goal. Is it realistic? Check it out. Ask someone who's, a support in your life about your reaction to something, or your concern if you have it, or maybe, get some assistance in making a goal seem a little bit more possible. Talk back to that negative voice with preset phrases and that you have saved on your phone that you can go to in a stressful moment, or on a post-it on your computer. Brainstorm these at a calm moment, perhaps with someone you trust. Ask for some help with prioritizing and chunking if you're facing tasks that feel daunting. You don't have to do everything on your own. Building awareness means you're checking it out and you're assessing, do I need help? Where do I need help? What kind? What would serve me? Then another step toward overcoming perfectionism is shifting your focus. You're going to start to pay more attention to the things you do well. And write these down, put them on your refrigerator. In fact, right now, while you're listening to me, maybe jot down 3 things that you do pretty well. I like when I blah, blah, blah. I think I do a good job or a good enough job at blank. I've never been perfect. I've made it this far, and this is something I'm working on. I would encourage you to consider creating a voice memo or a journal each evening of 3 things that went well in your day. Research has shown that this process reduces negativity and depression and improves a positive outlook because you're practicing shifting your focus. Your 3 things could be, I made a great cup of coffee this morning, or I nailed it at my presentation at work, or I really showed up for my friend Carolyn when she needed me. Shift your focus from comparing your insides to other people's outsides. That's that compare and despair. And assuming that everyone looks better than you do on the outside, so they are better off than you are, and recognizing that these thoughts are simply untrue. They may just be more skilled at hiding it. I wear my emotions on my sleeve. Do you? If you do, then other people are going to look more together sometimes than you do. Learning to enjoy the small achievements is a challenge for any perfectionist. And this is tied to setting more accurate expectations for yourself and for others. Of course, overcoming perfectionism means accepting mistakes. Your learning is an essential part of living. And it means stumbling, picking yourself up, and trying again. And this is the essence of a growth mindset. Sometimes you need to pivot. Sometimes you need to tweak something that you're doing and try again. You regrouping or making changes is not a failure. It's actually the process of growth that we're all engaged in while we live here on this planet. So be kinder to yourself when you've messed up or things haven't turned out as you hoped. If you wouldn't say what you say to yourself to a 3rd grader with a skin knee, why would you say that? Why? Lower the pressure on yourself and begin to practice that mindfulness, being kind to yourself in small ways. This means turning your attention away from that internal noise, that background noise that's like really unpleasant music that sometimes distracts us from what we're doing. So I would encourage you to practice that. Maybe put some music on and see if you can do something something different at the same time. It's just a suggestion. Notice the progress that you're making. That's the most important thing in accepting your mistakes. Offer yourself reassurance and remember that you're doing the best you can given your resources and the challenges of a given situation. We all are. You know, that's all we can really ask. And remind ourselves, I'm doing what I can do given the challenges and my resources in a particular situation. Now, one of the real challenges for overcoming perfectionism is receiving feedback gracefully. Every day, somebody or something is going to give you feedback about your actions, your words, or your emotions. It's a fundamental part of life. So instead of getting down on yourself when that feedback is negative or dismissing what's positive, try to accept what you hear with some neutrality and grace. Use reflective listening to deflect your emotional response and just get the cognition going. What I heard you say is X. Did I get that right? Is there anything else? Then, after you've acknowledged that you've heard what they've said, take some time to think about it. You're going to need some time, like everybody with ADHD and plenty of people without it, to consider what was being said and how you want to respond. Your impulse will be to respond quickly and emotionally. Pause before responding. Acknowledge what the person is saying so they feel heard and say something like, "You've made some interesting points. I'd like to think about what you said and get back to you by a certain time." Take the time you need to reflect on their feedback. Is there some truth to what they've said? Can you learn something and make a change? Are you denying a compliment? Circle back to them when you're ready. Your goal is to stay present, to avoid defensiveness, and stop a shame spiral because someone has given you some critical feedback. You're not bad. That blame game is toxic, and it's not going to teach you anything that's growth-oriented. It's just going to make you feel bad and wrong. The question that you want to ask is, how can this help me move forward in life? So we want to set realistic goals when we're perfectionists. So use your own compass of meaning to assess how you're doing rather than applying unachievable standards of success set by others. Whether your boss wants you to work 25 more hours a week and when you're already at 40, or you can and you really feel like you can maybe handle 5, or 40 is your max, or you push yourself to join in cleaning the apartment with your housemates when your research papers due tomorrow and you don't have the time. Start to consider what you can actually handle, what your desire is that you would like to move toward versus what you think you should be doing, and then feeling like you can't do that. So there are different levels of goals. There's the, I got this, 95% of the time I can do this. I'm good with that. Then there's the middle range, which is 50%. I can do this half of the time, or maybe 3/4 of the time with some support. And then there's the top tier, which I call the 5%. Help. This is not in my wheelhouse yet. I need a lot of support around it. Eventually, when something from the 50% range moves down to that got it 95%, I can move something from that top tier down. This helps us differentiate our goals and allows us space to work on some things and not work on everything. In fact, my personal belief is you can probably work on 1, maybe 2 traits at a time, not more than that. Of course, when you're thinking about executive functioning skills related to perfectionism, we want to look at initiation, breaking things down and into small achievable parts, and using a guideline of what to do with notifications. Time management, address time blindness that comes with ADHD with external clocks, time timer, tomato timer, alarms, alerts. Create routines that can help you stay on the path that you want to stay on. In terms of organization, use lists and to order tasks, to do a brain dump of what they are. Use calendars, particularly electronic as well as written, to arrange events and deadlines with reminders. And think about what kinds of organizing systems make sense to your brain. You want to aim for efficacy, not perfection. To build prioritizing and planning, do that brain dump and organize things versus the urgent and important matrix, which I put up here, and set up a strategy for how you want to approach your tasks. Do you like doing something easy to warm up and then move into something medium, then hard, something hard first to start? Of course, practice tools related to emotional control and of improving your working memory. Your working memory draws on past experiences to relate to your current experience and to help you project into the future. Slow things down. Emotions and working memory are deeply tied together. And figure out some simple ways that you can support yourself when you're feeling uncomfortable, when you're you're pushing yourself to get it just perfectly, and how to turn down the noise of that perfectionistic negative self-talk. And finally, metacognition, of course, self-awareness. Ask yourself, how am I doing? What's helped me before that I could apply to this situation? Reflect on open-ended questions that foster some honest thinking about yourself without criticism and shoulds. Maybe use your body sensations to improve your self-awareness of when you feel like you're kind of revving up into a perfectionist or, overwhelm, or when you feel like you're going into a shame spiral. Reframe your self-evaluation from good and bad to what's working and not working. Now, in this workshop, we've talked about a lot of different things, but I want to come back to a fundamental lesson, which is that we want to practice radical self-acceptance. Radical acceptance refers to the ability to accept situations that are outside of your control without judging them or yourself, to reduce your related suffering. It's one of 4 options for approaching any problems, according to Marsha Linehan, who is the founder of dialectical behavioral therapy, DBT. So radical acceptance is accepting situations that are outside of your control without judging them or yourself. Radical acceptance is about accepting life on life's terms, not resisting what you cannot or choose not to change. It's about saying yes to life just as it is. Radical acceptance for people who have perfectionism, who have ADHD, is about accepting who you are, warts and all, without judgment, and being open to a growth mindset that you're living, you're learning, and you're adapting to things that may require confronting some anxiety about not getting it right. Oops. Thank you so much for joining me. We're going to open it up for questions. There is a free handout that I've put together for you on perfectionism and ADHD. It'll be in the email that you get later with the link to the recorded session. We can also put this up in the Q&A. I'm really looking forward to your questions. Please stay connected with me via my website, where I have all kinds of resources for people living with ADHD, anxiety, and more, or follow me on social media. And of course, join me on Fridays at 4 for our Attitude Live Facebook sessions. They're a lot of fun, and there's a wonderful community of people waiting to support you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sharon. That was an incredible presentation. And I have to say that the comments questions and comments, reflections that we've received are among the most poignant and thoughtful that I've ever seen in a webinar. I'm getting a little choked up over here because, it's just clear that this issue goes beyond the surface. There is so much depth here, and so many people who really are feeling like they're finally getting some of the help that they really need. So just want to start out with that, a note of thanks and reflection to this audience that you are doing great work being here. Thank you for joining us.
Amen. Thank you so much for showing up. Thank you.
Yeah. So,
and good for you. High five to you for showing up. We're in the middle of the mountain, and I'm turning to you and I'm saying, way to go.
Seriously, this is a first step in the right direction, and feel good about this. I just wanted to read one comment, which I think sums up kind of how a lot of people are feeling. One of our participants wrote, "I feel like a lot of my procrastination is based in past failure and not wanting to experience that again, which then guarantees failure."
Wow,
that just really hit me.
That is so true for so many people, that part of the perfectionism is I don't want to experience that shame, that blame, that embarrassment. I'm going to do everything I can to make sure I don't. And here's the thing. When you make choices that hold you back in any way, you're not sharing your light with the rest of the world. And I know that is super corny, but I'm going to say it because you actually can't live a life where you're not taking risks. It's not serving your greater purpose, and it's not sharing you and what you have to offer with all of us. So this is why a growth mindset is important, that we want to say, you know what, I have had struggles in the past. I have experienced failure. So I am reluctant to try again. I'm nervous about trying again. So I'm going to start small. I'm going to start with a small step. And I think that is what will help build confidence. And help you, write a new narrative about yourself. There have been probably many past failures that haunt all of you and haunt all of us. The challenge is, being able to look at those with some perspective. Hindsight is much more 20/20. What was going on in that moment for you? What was the environment like? What was happening in your greater life? all of these things affect how you're going to take a risk. And for perfectionists, we're afraid of, there's a lot of fear that's tied into perfectionism. So again, I really like that what Tara Brach talks about is putting your hand on your heart and being able to be kind, to say, you know what, this is really scary, so I'm going to start super small.
That is great advice. One theme that I saw in a lot of questions today was that of rejection sensitive dysphoria. And that's, for those of you not familiar, the idea of even the perception of rejection can be very, like, even physically impactful on some people. And one question related to that was someone wondering, is fearing asking for help part of perfectionism? I get scared to ask for help because what if they judge me or don't believe me, don't believe I need help, or that I'm being a burden?
I think it absolutely is. I think that the fear is that people don't think you need help, or that you're going to be a burden, or that they may not be able to help you the way you need. This is a fear I see a lot in kids, and teens, which is, I'm going to ask for help and then they're not going to help me. So what's the point of even asking for the help? So I think that the thing is that we are often afraid of asking for help for all of the negative reasons. So it might be worth really thinking about, who am I going to ask for the help from? And how specific can I be? What is the question that I'm asking, or the questions that I'm asking? And if you could prepare one or two of those in advance and bring them with you when you ask for help, it will help reduce your anxiety, because you'll have something to refer to, and that might assist you more than trying to think about it in the spur of the moment, particularly for people who have some social anxiety. In terms of rejection sensitivity dysphoria, I think that's definitely a topic for another webinar. And I know that I'll be talking about social anxiety, and will address rejection sensitivity in April, or the end of March, I think. I'm not sure. I think it's April when I come back for another webinar. So what I want to say in terms of that is that your perception of what someone is thinking of you, it may very well not be related to what they're thinking of you. And because a lot of people with ADHD and perfectionism have such at a core, a negative view or an insecurity about who they are, that they imagine that the other person is thinking those same things when they may not be thinking about them at all. And so that's a possibility that I'd like you to include in your effort to ask for help.
Wonderful. I will sneak in at least one more question here before we're out of time. And this is one we received often about analysis paralysis. And someone wrote, I have a very hard time getting started or moving forward in a project because I worry there's a better way than what I might have chosen.
Oh, that's a great question. Right. Yeah. So, there are a million ways to do things, and you could spend all your time trying to find that better way. And what I would encourage you to do in that moment is to say, there are a million ways to do things. I'm going to try one. Someone else may look at this when I'm finished and say, well, you could have done it this way. That's true. If I go down this path and I get stuck, well, then I'm going to have to turn around and try something else. It's kind of like going through if you live, I live in New England, as I said, in the corn mazes in the fall, wherever you are, that you try a certain path and it may or may not work, and you regroup and you go back, or you make a left turn or a right turn. So that the thing is that by not what's paralyzing is the overthinking part, right? Well, I could do it this way, or I could do it that way, or I could do it this way. And then you can't get started at all. And I do this myself sometimes too. And so what I have to do is kind of say, okay, let's narrow the field. I'm just going to try this one thing, because I'm going to try this one thing. And in some ways, it's kind of like throwing the cards up in the air and seeing which one lands first. Oh, it's a jack of spades. I'm going to try the jack of spades.
I like that. I'm very sad to be the one to say that we are out of time for today. However, I'm so thankful, Sharon, for your continued contributions to Attitude. This was a fantastic webinar. I feel like I actually just emerged from an hour of therapy. So thank you. And thank you for everyone in our community for joining us today and for contributing your voice to this webinar as well. I will encourage you to join us next week on a different topic, that of body-focused repetitive behaviors. Dr. Roberto Olivardia will be leading that one, and Sharon will be back in April on the topic of social anxiety. So hope you will join us for that. And just to keep updated on all of our webinars, our articles, everything else, please visit attitudemag.com/newsletters. And do keep an eye out for the resource that Sharon mentioned that we'll send out in the email after the event is available for replay. All right, everyone. Thank you so much, Sharon. Thank you again. Have a wonderful day.
Thank you, Annie.